He was a king who had forgotten what it meant to feel. A monster whose heart hadn't beaten in 600 years. Until one night, in the rain, a starving girl running for her life mistook him for her brother. And hugged him. That single touch woke something that the world believed was long dead. A bond between light and darkness, powerful enough to end 1,000 years of blood, or destroy everything reborn in its light. This is the story of the Vampire King, the poor girl who made his dead heart beat again, and the dawn that changed the world. Welcome to the heart that shouldn't beat. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from right now? I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Rain poured over the city like a punishment from the heavens. The narrow alleys of Varin, the capital of the Vampire Kingdom, shimmered with puddles and shadows. The air smelled of smoke, wet stone, and desperation. A young girl ran barefoot through the storm, clutching a small loaf of bread to her chest as if it were made of gold. Her name was Ilara. "Stop that thief," someone shouted behind her. The voices of two guards echoed through the alley, their boots splashing through water. The clang of their armor sounded like the closing of a cage. Ilara didn't look back. Her lungs burned, her soaked dress clung to her skin, and her heart pounded so loudly she could hardly hear the thunder. Not for me, she thought, tightening her grip on the bread. It's for them. At the edge of the market, 4 small orphans hid in an abandoned bell tower, waiting for her return. They were hungry, always hungry. She could take the beating later, the punishment, the fear, anything but their empty eyes. The market was chaos even at night. Lanterns flickered under the rain, vendors shouted about salted meat and dried herbs, and people pushed through the narrow aisles with their cloaks pulled tight. Ilara ducked under a stall and burst out into a side street. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She could already hear the guards getting closer. Their heavy steps echoed like drums of doom. "I can't go home. I can't lead them there." Desperate, Ilara turned into a narrow alley she didn't recognize. The walls were high and wet, the ground uneven. At the end of it, half shrouded in rain and darkness, stood a tall figure cloaked in black. Her heart jumped. For a split second, she thought she recognized him. The height, the way he stood still in the rain, it looked just like her older brother, Rian, who had left 2 years ago to work in the northern mines. He had promised he'd come back, but he never did. She'd been waiting ever since. "Rian," she gasped. Her tired mind refused to question it. "Rian." She ran straight into him before he could move. Her arms wrapped around his waist. She buried her face into the cold fabric of his cloak, shivering from exhaustion. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're after me. I just wanted to feed them, please." The man didn't move. For a moment, there was only silence. No rain. No shouts. No heartbeat. It was as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Then, thump. A sound echoed in the stranger's chest, faint but unmistakable. Thump. Another beat. Stronger. Ilara froze. She realized then, this wasn't her brother. The body she held was ice-cold, unnaturally still, like marble come to life. The air around them seemed to hum with strange energy, prickling her skin. She lifted her head slowly. The hooded man looked down at her. Beneath the dripping shadows, 2 eyes glowed faintly red like embers buried in ash. His face was pale, impossibly beautiful, and carved with sharp, cruel features. His lips parted slightly as though he had forgotten how to breathe. He stared at her with something between shock and confusion. Ilara's mouth went dry. She stumbled backward, her bare feet slipping in the puddles. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I thought you were, I didn't mean to." The man's hand rose to his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his voice, when it came, was low and rough, like stone cracking after centuries of silence. "What have you done?" Ilara didn't understand. She backed away another step. Around them, the sound of rain returned, the shouts of guards echoing down the street. People were screaming, running from the alley's mouth. Someone whispered the word that froze her blood. "Vampire." The guards stopped chasing her. They stared into the alley, pale with fear. The stranger turned his head toward them, his glowing eyes narrowing. He didn't bare his fangs, didn't move, but his presence was enough to send the men fleeing. They disappeared into the night, leaving only the sound of their retreat. Ilara stood shaking, clutching the bread, unsure if she should run or fall to her knees. The vampire lowered his hand from his chest. His voice softened. "Go," he said. She blinked. What? Go," he repeated, though something in his tone sounded almost afraid. "Before I remember what I am." Ilara didn't wait to be told twice. She turned and ran, splashing through puddles, her breath breaking into sobs. She didn't stop until she reached the old bell tower where the orphans waited. By then, the bread was half ruined by rain, but the children didn't care. They ate greedily, while Ilara sat trembling in the corner, her hands still tingling from where they had touched the vampire's chest. When she looked down, she saw something strange, a faint silver line on her wrist, glowing softly before fading away. She pressed her hand to her heart and whispered into the dark, "What did I just do?" Far from the city, deep within the forest of obsidian pines, stood Nightfall Citadel, the home of the Vampire King. The great hall was silent except for the crackle of fire in the stone hearth. Shadows stretched across the black marble floor like living things. The air felt heavy, expectant. At the center of the hall stood King Darius Vane. He had dismissed his servants and guards. He stood alone, his gloved hand pressed against his chest, his eyes wide as if he couldn't believe what he felt beneath them. Thump. The sound echoed again, faint but undeniable. His heart was beating. After 600 years of silence, the impossible was happening. He sank into his throne, his mind racing through memories long buried. He had been a man once, before the curse, before the crown of blood. He remembered warmth, sunlight, laughter, all stolen from him the night he was turned. And now, after centuries of emptiness, a single human girl had brought it all crashing back. "How?" he whispered. A door opened softly, and a tall figure stepped inside. Cloaked in black armor, face hidden behind a mask, he knelt before the throne. "My lord," said the deep, metallic voice. "You called for me." "Shadow Warden," Darius said quietly. His voice trembled, though not from fear. "Tell me something. Can a dead heart beat?" The warden hesitated. "My king, your heart." Darius's gloved hand struck his chest again, as though trying to silence it. "It beats," he said. "It shouldn't. But it does." "Impossible," the warden murmured. "No vampire." "She touched me," Darius interrupted. His gaze turned distant, remembering the rain, the girl's desperate face, the warmth of her arms around him. "A mortal girl. She thought I was someone else. She embraced me. And when she did," his voice lowered. The world stopped. The warden looked up slowly. "A human made your heart beat again?" Darius nodded once, his jaw tightening. "There is only one thing that could explain it. The resonance." The warden stiffened. "The ancient bond between life and death. It's a myth, my king." "So was the sunrise," Darius said bitterly, "until I felt its memory again." He stood, pacing the length of the hall. His movements were graceful, controlled, but there was a tension in them, like a beast pacing a cage. "Find her," he ordered. "The girl from the market. I want her name, where she lives, everything." "My lord," the warden said carefully, "if it is truly the resonance, she is dangerous. The old texts say such bonds unmake both souls. She could destroy you." Darius turned sharply, his crimson eyes flashing. "Then I will face her destruction willingly, because for the first time in centuries, I remember what it means to feel alive." The warden bowed low. "As you command." When he was gone, Darius sank back into his throne, his thoughts spiraling. His hand trembled as he removed one glove. His skin was pale as snow, his veins dark beneath the surface. He pressed his bare palm to his chest and waited. Thump. The sound came again, stronger this time. He almost laughed, except the emotion that rose wasn't joy. It was fear. "What are you doing to me, little one?" he whispered to the empty hall. Outside, thunder rolled over the citadel like an omen. In the city below, Ilara woke to the sound of morning bells. For a blissful moment, she forgot about the night before. Then pain shot through her wrist, and she remembered everything, the red eyes, the cold skin, the terrible silence. She looked at her wrist. The silver mark was still there, faint but real, like a thread of moonlight woven into her skin. "What is this?" she murmured. She rubbed at it, but it didn't fade. Instead, it pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat answering another heartbeat far away. A soft knock came at her door. "Elara, you awake?" It was Miri, the baker's daughter, who shared the attic room with her. "Father says the morning ovens are ready. We have to start kneading." Elara jumped up, pulling down her sleeve. "Coming." The bakery smelled of flour and warm bread. For a moment, it almost felt normal. But when Miri handed her a lump of dough, Elara's hands shook. "Are you all right?" Miri asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Elara lied. "You sure? You were gone half the night. People are saying something happened at the market. Something about a vampire." Elara dropped the dough. "A vampire?" Miri nodded eagerly, whispering, "Old Thomas said he saw him himself, tall as a shadow, eyes like blood, standing in the rain. And get this, some crazy girl ran up and hugged him." Elara froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "Hugged him? Aha! Can you imagine? I'd die of fear. They say the girl vanished after that. Probably cursed." Elara forced a laugh, though her voice sounded thin. "People will believe anything." Still, her hand drifted to her sleeve again, feeling the mark beneath it. Cursed or not, she couldn't forget those eyes or the way he had said go, like it was a prayer instead of a command. Later that night, after the bakery closed, she climbed to the rooftop to breathe. The city stretched beneath her, lanterns glowing like fireflies, the great citadel a dark shape on the hill. The sky was clear now, full of stars. Elara pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart was beating faster for no reason. Somewhere out there, a man she didn't know and should have feared was thinking about her. Back in the citadel, Darius stood on his balcony, staring at the same stars. His night's report had come swiftly. "She's called Elara," the warden had said. "No family name. Works in a bakery. Lives in the attic above it. She steals food for orphans, often caught, never silent." A slow smile had touched the king's lips. "She steals to feed others," he had murmured. "A foolish saint." Now, as the wind whispered through the black forest, Darius closed his eyes and felt it again, that strange, living rhythm inside his chest. He imagined her small hands pressed against him, her heartbeat fluttering against the stillness of his own. He could almost hear her whisper, "Please, help me." And for the first time in 6 centuries, King Darius Vane, the monster feared across continents, felt something dangerously human. Guilt. Longing. Hope. He opened his eyes to the darkness and made a promise to no one but the night. "I will find you, Elara. And when I do, I will understand why a single touch made a dead heart remember how to beat." The wind carried the vow away, across the mountains, down to the sleeping city where a girl with a silver mark dreamed of crimson eyes and rain that refused to fall. Morning sunlight slipped through the cracks of the old attic roof, turning the dust in the air into tiny flecks of gold. Elara stretched stiffly and winced as her muscles complained. Her whole body still felt like it had been running through that storm. When she glanced down, the faint silver mark on her wrist gleamed for a heartbeat, then faded again. She rubbed it, whispering, "Stay quiet, please." Below her, the bakery was alive with sound. Trays clattered, dough slapped against tables, and the air smelled of warm bread and honey. It was the only smell in the world that made her feel safe. Miri's voice floated up from the ladder. "Elara, the early customers are lining up. Can you take the front for a bit?" Elara tied her apron and hurried down. Her job was simple: smile, count coins, and pretend she didn't have a secret glowing on her wrist. By noon, the shop was busy. Workers from the forges bought rolls for their lunches, mothers with children argued over prices, and the baker himself shouted orders between the ovens. Elara worked quickly, forcing her smile. 2 honey buns and a loaf," said a woman, dropping copper coins on the counter. "Thank you," Elara said automatically, sliding the bread into a bag. She was just reaching for more paper when a small hand tugged at her sleeve. It was Leo, one of the orphans from the bell tower. His cheeks were pale, his clothes soaked from the rain. "Miss Elara," he whispered, "Pip's sick." He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Ilara's heart twisted. She looked toward the kitchen. Miri and her father were busy. No one would notice a missing roll or two. She slipped a small loaf into Leo's hands. Go. Quickly. Tell Pip I'll come tonight. The boy's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, miss. Be careful, she warned. Guards are still angry about yesterday. He nodded and vanished into the crowd. Moments later, Miri appeared beside her. Did that beggar boy just take bread? Ilara swallowed. He's just a friend. He'll pay later. Miri sighed. You're too soft, Ilara. The world doesn't reward kindness. Maybe not, Ilara murmured, but it needs it. She didn't see the cloaked man who paused outside the window, watching her with unreadable eyes. His disguise was perfect: brown hair instead of black, warm human skin instead of marble white, but nothing could hide the quiet power in the way he stood. Darius Vane had found her. He stayed in the shadow of a lamppost, studying her movements. The way she smiled at customers, the gentle patience in her voice, the small acts of compassion she offered so easily. She feeds others while she starves herself, he thought. How can something so fragile carry such light? Every time she brushed her hair back, he caught a glimpse of the sleeve hiding her wrist. He could feel the pull of the mark, an invisible thread tugging between them. His dead heart still beat steady now, as if keeping time with hers. Foolish girl, he whispered, though his voice was soft, almost fond. When she laughed at something Miri said, Darius turned away before anyone noticed the flicker of emotion on his face. He walked back through the busy streets, blending into the crowds. He'd seen enough to know one thing: the bond between them wasn't fading. It was growing stronger. That night, Ilara slipped through the alleys to the bell tower. The moon hung low and red, and the wind smelled of rain again. Inside, the 4 orphans waited, thin, pale, wrapped in rags. She handed out the bread she'd saved, watching them eat with quiet satisfaction. Leo looked up from his crust. Miss Ilara, people say vampires are coming back to the city. Do you think it's true? Ilara hesitated. They've always been here. They just hide in the dark. What if they come for us? Another child whispered. Then I'll stand in front of you, Ilara said firmly. They'd have to go through me first. The children laughed weakly, but she meant every word. When they finally fell asleep, she stepped outside, leaning against the broken bell tower wall. The night was eerily quiet. She closed her eyes and felt it again. Thump. Not her heartbeat. Another. Deep, steady, echoing inside her bones. She opened her eyes, heart racing. Who's there? No answer, only wind moving through the street. Still, she felt it. Someone out there, watching. And the strange truth settled in her chest. Whoever he was, wherever he was, their hearts were beating together. Dawn crept over the forest that hid Nightfall Citadel. Inside, Darius stood before an ancient mirror that rarely reflected his face. Through powerful enchantment, he had forced the glass to obey him. The man in the mirror didn't look like a king. His glamour magic disguised his unnatural beauty, softening sharp angles, hiding the faint glow in his eyes. His cloak was plain brown, his clothes those of a traveler. You look ordinary, said a dry voice from the doorway. The shadow warden leaned against the frame, arms folded. That's the idea, Darius replied. My lord, sneaking into the city disguised as a merchant, this is beneath you. So is living with a dead heart, Darius said, fastening his collar. And yet, here we are. The warden's tone hardened. If the nobles learn you're obsessed with a human, they will act. The court already whispers about your instability. Let them whisper, Darius said quietly. I must see her again. This bond, it's not chance. He stepped past the warden. Keep the citadel under guard. No one follows me. The warden bowed reluctantly. As you command. The road to Varin felt different in daylight. The sunlight pressed against his enchanted skin like a weight, not pain but discomfort, foreign warmth he hadn't felt in centuries. He moved carefully, slow, keeping to the shade. By mid-morning he reached the bakery. The street bustled with life. Children ran past, merchants called out prices, and somewhere nearby, a musician played a bright tune on a flute. Darius stood outside the door for too long. The scent of bread and honey wrapped around him. A part of him, the part that remembered being human, ached. Foolish, he told himself. You are a king, not a lovesick boy. Still, he pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. Warm light filled the room. Behind the counter, Ilara was arranging loaves on a tray. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands dusted with flour. Strands of dark hair framed her face. She looked tired, but when she smiled at a customer, it was genuine. Darius's heart gave a painful, unwanted thump. Welcome, sir, Miri called from the side. What can I get for you? He forced his voice steady. 2 rolls. Perhaps something sweet. I'm traveling north. Of course. Miri turned. Ilara, could you pack the gentleman's order? Ilara wiped her hands and approached. The moment their eyes met, everything inside her seemed to stop. It was him. She didn't know how, but she felt it instantly, the weight of his presence, the way the air thickened around him. Her mind screamed to run, yet her feet stayed still. Darius watched her, trying to appear calm, though his pulse echoed in his ears. Behind the glamour, his real eyes burned crimson, but she couldn't see it. Not fully. You work here every day? He asked lightly. Yes, sir. 6 days a week, she said, her voice small. Long hours for so little pay. I'm used to it. She handed him the wrapped rolls, careful that their fingers didn't touch. But even through the paper, the mark on her wrist pulsed. She felt warmth spreading up her arm. He noticed. He could always feel it when the bond stirred. Thank you, he said, trying to sound like an ordinary man. He should have turned and left. Instead, words slipped out before he could stop them. Why do you give food to the beggar children? Ilara blinked. How do you? I saw you yesterday, he lied quickly. You risked punishment to feed them. They were hungry, she said simply. That's reason enough. Her honesty disarmed him. For centuries, he'd believed compassion was weakness. But hearing it from her lips, it sounded like strength. Before he could answer, a shout came from outside. Hey! I told you no begging here. A city guard was shoving a small boy, Leo, away from the bakery steps. The child tripped and fell into the mud. Ilara darted to the door. Please, he wasn't hurting anyone. The guard sneered. Filthy rat should learn his place. Leave him alone, she said, stepping between them. Here. She fished in her apron and pulled out a single copper coin. Take this and walk away. The guard laughed. You think 1 coin will buy my patience? Before he could grab her arm, a cold voice cut through the air. Take the coin. And leave. The guard turned and froze. The man who spoke wasn't loud, but there was something in his tone, an authority that crawled under the skin. Darius stepped forward, placing a silver coin in the guard's palm. For your trouble. The man looked at the coin, then at Darius. His face paled. Some instinct whispered danger. He muttered a curse and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. Ilara turned to Darius, her expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. You didn't have to do that. Neither did you, he said. Yet you did. She blinked. He needed help. That's all. Darius looked at her for a long moment. Kindness from those who have nothing is rarer than gold. Color rose to her cheeks. You speak like a noble. He smiled faintly. I used to be something worse. She didn't know how to reply. The boy tugged on her sleeve. Miss, I should go. Thank you. Ilara slipped one of the rolls she'd just sold into his hands. Eat first, she said. The child ran off, smiling. Darius watched the exchange, feeling something tighten in his chest. He had ruled through fear for centuries, believing mercy was weakness. Yet this fragile girl gave away what little she had and somehow seemed stronger than any vampire lord he had ever known. You'll get in trouble for that, he said softly. She shrugged. He was hungrier than me. And you already paid for the role. The way she smiled, tired but sincere, nearly broke him. What's your name? He asked. Ilara. She hesitated. And yours? He should have lied. He meant to. But the truth slipped free like a confession. Darius. Her brow furrowed. That's a strange name. Old, he said quickly. Not many use it now. She nodded. Well, Darius, thank you again for helping that boy. He inclined his head. Safe travels, Miss Ilara. He turned to leave before he could do something foolish, like tell her who he really was or how her heartbeat echoed inside him. When he stepped into the sunlight, she called softly after him, safe travels. He stopped for a heartbeat, surprised. It had been centuries since anyone wished him safety. The words wrapped around him like warmth he didn't deserve. Without looking back, he whispered to himself, and to you, little saint. Inside the bakery, Miri nudged Ilara. You know that man? Ilara blinked. No. Why? He looked at you like he'd just seen a miracle. Ilara forced a laugh. Maybe he's just strange. But as she turned away, her wrist began to glow again, faint and silver beneath her sleeve. She pressed her hand over it, her heart racing. Out in the street, Darius felt the same pull. The beat in his chest grew stronger, painful even, as if her heartbeat called to his across the crowd. He knew he should leave the city, forget her, bury this madness before it consumed him. But as he walked toward the shadowed forest, one thought followed him like a whisper. The more I try to stay away, the more alive I feel. Ilara didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the stranger from the bakery, the man whose voice was both terrifying and gentle. She kept replaying the moment when their eyes met. It was only a few seconds, but in that instant, the whole world had seemed to vanish. She turned on her side, staring at the ceiling of the attic. The faint silver mark on her wrist shimmered softly in the moonlight that filtered through the cracked roof. When she pressed her fingers to it, warmth pulsed beneath her skin, as if something inside was alive. What are you? She whispered. Down below, the city slept. But beyond the walls of Varin, in the forest shadowed by mist, King Darius Vane could not rest either. He stood on the balcony of his citadel, staring into the endless dark. The night air was cool, but his chest burned. Every few moments, he felt it, a second heartbeat. Soft, faint, but constant. It was not his own. He gripped the balcony rail until cracks formed in the stone. She's human. This shouldn't be possible. He closed his eyes, and the world shifted. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw flickers of light, flashes of a bakery's warm hearth, the sound of laughter, the scent of fresh bread. They weren't his memories. They were hers. The bond between them was deepening. He turned sharply. Warden. The shadow warden appeared almost instantly, materializing from the dark like a wraith. My lord. Darius's voice was quiet but strained. I see her dreams. The warden's masked head tilted slightly. That cannot be. I see them, Darius repeated. I feel her hunger, her fear, even her warmth. The bond grows stronger by the hour. He paused, then said in a low, dangerous tone, and I cannot stop it. The warden shifted uneasily. Then the old prophecies were true. The resonance ties two souls until they share one heart. But if one dies, the other follows, Darius finished grimly. Yes, I know. He moved away from the railing and into the hall, the hem of his dark coat whispering against the marble. She doesn't know what she's done. I must see her again, understand what this bond wants. My lord, the warden said carefully, the council grows restless. If they learn you are bound to a mortal, they will strike. Let them, Darius said without turning back. If they wish to test me, they will remember why I am their king. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving the warden staring after him, torn between duty and pity. Ilara's days passed in a blur of confusion. She worked, she smiled, she fed the orphans, but nothing felt normal anymore. The mark burned when she was scared, glowed when she was kind, and pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Sometimes she heard whispers, soft, distant, like someone calling her name through a dream. Ilara. She would spin around, expecting someone behind her, but the street would be empty. On the fourth night, she had a dream that wasn't hers. She saw a grand hall made of black stone, torches burning blue along the walls. A man sat on a throne carved from obsidian, his crown of silver twisted like thorns. His eyes glowed red, but there was sorrow in them. He looked at her, not through her, but at her, and said, "Why did you touch me?" Ilara woke up with tears on her cheeks and the taste of ashes in her mouth. That same night, far away, Darius opened his eyes from a trance, his heart racing. He had seen her in his dreams too, standing barefoot in a ruined bell tower, looking at him with fear and compassion mixed together. Two worlds, one heartbeat. He whispered her name into the darkness. Ilara. And though she was miles away, sleeping in a cold attic, she stirred and whispered, "Darius." The city of Varin glittered under hundreds of red lanterns. Every year, the nobles and citizens celebrated the Festival of Crimson Veins, a night meant to honor the peace between humans and vampires, though everyone knew it was really to remind mortals who ruled them. This year, the festival was grander than ever. The streets were filled with dancers in crimson masks, musicians playing haunting tunes, and stalls selling food dyed red to mimic blood. Ilara hated it. Still, when the announcement came that the royal castle needed servants for the feast, paying 10 silver coins for one night's work, she didn't hesitate. 10 silver could feed the orphans for a month. Miri tried to talk her out of it. "You'll be serving vampires, Ilara. What if one of them?" "I'll keep my head down," Ilara said. "They won't even notice me." She was wrong. The castle was larger than she imagined, towering above the city like a mountain of shadow. Inside, everything gleamed with dark beauty, black marble floors, silver chandeliers, and portraits of rulers whose eyes seemed to follow her. The other servants whispered nervously as they were lined up and given instructions by the head steward, Madame Cora, a sharp woman with grey hair and eyes like steel. "You will not speak unless spoken to," Cora warned. "You will not meet their eyes. And under no circumstances will you approach the high table. Understand?" The servants nodded. Ilara swallowed hard. Her wrist had begun to burn the moment she entered the hall. Something inside the castle pulled at her, an invisible force that made her heartbeat race. When the great doors opened and the guests entered, the air grew cold. Dozens of vampires glided into the room, their elegance terrifying. Their eyes glowed in shades of crimson, gold, and silver. They smiled, but there was nothing human in those smiles. The music started, low and eerie, and the feast began. Ilara tried to focus on her tray of wine goblets. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to move. One mistake could cost her life. She made it halfway across the hall before the room fell silent. The massive doors at the end of the chamber opened again. A figure entered. He was tall, dressed in black and deep red, a long coat embroidered with silver patterns that shimmered under the candlelight. His hair was dark, his face pale and sharp, his eyes burning faintly beneath his crown. Every vampire in the hall dropped to one knee. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from the market. The stranger from the bakery. The one she had hugged in the rain. She froze, the tray tilting in her trembling hands. Her mind screamed run, but her body refused. King Darius Vane, the ruler of the immortal court, walked down the aisle, his cloak trailing behind him like living shadow. His expression was calm, unreadable. But when his eyes met Ilara's across the hall, something flickered behind them, recognition. The world blurred. Her knees felt weak. The tray slipped from her grasp. Crystal goblets shattered on the marble floor, red wine spilling like blood. The sound echoed in the silence. Every head turned. Madame Cora gasped, her face going white. "You fool. What have you done?" Ilara stammered, I'm sorry." Before she could bend to pick up the pieces, a noblewoman with silver hair and cruel eyes stepped forward. She smiled thinly. "A clumsy servant. How unfortunate." Her voice carried across the hall, sharp and mocking. "Shall I remove her, my king?" Ilara's blood ran cold. Remove meant kill. Darius's gaze never left Ilara. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but dangerous. "No." The noblewoman blinked. "My lord." "I said no," he repeated. "Leave her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vampires exchanged uneasy glances. No one defied Lady Virel and no one expected the king to protect a human servant. Ilara stared up at him, her heart pounding. He looked at her not with anger, but with something else, something that felt almost like pain. Madame Cora rushed forward, whispering, "Clean this up and go. Now." Elara dropped to her knees, gathering shards of glass with shaking hands. A sharp edge cut her palm, blood welling bright red. She didn't even feel it. When she looked up again, Darius was sitting on his throne, eyes fixed on her. The music resumed, but the air stayed tense. She felt the weight of his gaze like a touch. Every time she dared to glance up, he was still looking at her. "Who is she?" whispered one noble. "She smells of sunlight," said another. Lady Virel smiled coldly. "The king's pet, perhaps." Darius's hands tightened on the throne's armrests until the wood cracked. Elara finished cleaning, bowed low, and hurried from the hall. Her palm dripped blood onto the stone floor as she ran through the corridors. When she reached the servants' room, she sank to the ground, breathing hard. She pulled back her sleeve. The silver mark on her wrist was glowing brighter than ever, pulsing in time with her racing heart. "Oh no," she whispered. It wasn't fading. It was answering him. She pressed her bleeding hand against it, trying to stop the glow. But the harder she pressed, the brighter it burned. In the grand hall beyond, Darius sat motionless while his court feasted, his eyes distant. The sound of her heartbeat echoed in his chest like thunder. He pressed a hand to his ribs. For the first time in centuries, he felt something like fear, not of death, but of what the world would do to the fragile girl who had made a monster's heart remember how to live. The great hall still hummed with unease the morning after the festival. Whispers slid through the marble corridors like snakes. The king had spared a human girl. The king had looked at her as though she were someone precious. The king had changed. Lady Virel, draped in crimson silk, listened to the gossip with the faintest smile. Every rumor was another spark to feed her fire. "So the beast has found a heart again," she murmured. "Then it can be broken." She glided into the throne room where Darius sat reading reports of the border wars. "My lord," she said sweetly, "there is talk of the servant from last night. Shall I dispose of her quietly before the court begins to wonder why she still breathes?" Darius's eyes lifted. "You will do nothing." The words carried no anger, only command. But Virel felt the power behind them, the force that once bent armies. She bowed her head. "As you wish." Inside, she smiled. Defiance is the first crack. Elara woke late in the servants' quarters, her arm aching. The wound from the glass had closed overnight, leaving no scar, only that silver light under her skin. She hid it beneath a bandage, hoping no one would notice. Madame Cora stormed in. "Girl. His Majesty's court requires all servants to attend. Move." Elara followed the line of workers into the audience chamber, her stomach tight with dread. The air shimmered with the scent of wine and fear. Vampires lined both sides of the room. At the center stood Lady Virel, holding a jeweled chalice. "My king," Virel said loudly, a most disturbing discovery. "This chalice was stolen from the royal vault 2 nights ago. The thief is among the humans." Gasps rippled through the room. Elara froze as guards opened a small chest beside Virel. Inside lay a second chalice, identical, gleaming gold. "The proof," Virel announced, "was found hidden in a servant's trunk." "This girl's." Elara's breath vanished. "That's not true," she cried. "I've never even seen." Virel's expression was all sympathy. "Poor child, lies will not save you." The guards stepped forward. Elara backed away, shaking. "I didn't steal it. Please, someone must have planted it." The court murmured. Humans were never allowed near the vault. The accusation was impossible, and yet none dared question a noble's word. Darius rose slowly from his throne. "Bring her here." Elara's knees nearly gave out as she was dragged before him. He looked down at her, and for a heartbeat, she saw no cruelty in his face, only sorrow. "Did you take it?" he asked quietly. "No, my lord." "Do you know who did?" She shook her head. "I swear I'm innocent." Virel's laughter was soft as silk. "Your compassion blinds you, my king. Mortals lie to survive. Allow me to judge her and end this embarrassment." The hall waited for his verdict. Darius looked at Elara again, then turned to his court. "Release her." The words struck like thunder. Virel's mask cracked. My lord. Do not test me, Lady Virel. You accuse without proof. Her lips curved into a poisonous smile. As you command, Majesty. But mercy breeds weakness. The court remembers. When she swept from the chamber, her eyes met Ilara's, a promise of vengeance in that single glance. After the session, Darius found Ilara in the garden courtyard. She stood by a fountain, shaking from the weight of what had almost happened. When she heard footsteps, she stiffened. I told the truth, she said without turning. I know. She faced him, surprised. Then why risk angering them? I'm just a servant. His gaze softened. You are more than you know. Ilara swallowed. Because of whatever this is between us. He didn't deny it. The bond chose us both. It is older than any throne. She looked down at her bandaged wrist. It's ruining everything. They'll kill me because of it. He stepped closer, his voice low. They will not touch you. I swear it. You can't protect me from all of them, she whispered. They hate me. They fear what they cannot understand. She met his eyes. And you? Do you understand it? His silence was the answer. For a long moment they stood there, rain beginning to fall again, soft and cold. Ilara turned away first. If kindness is weakness, then maybe I don't want to be strong. Darius watched her walk back toward the servant's wing, her hair clinging to her shoulders. The mark on his chest burned with every step she took away. He murmured to the empty air, and maybe neither do I. That night, Virel called a secret council of nobles in her private chamber. Candles burned black. He spares a human thief, she said, pacing. He breaks our law for her. This cannot continue. One noble hissed, what would you have us do? Remind him what it means to be immortal. She lifted a vial filled with thick, shimmering blood. The blood oath will answer us. If the king will not destroy his weakness, we will. When she poured the blood onto the floor, it curled into smoke, forming words in an ancient tongue, a curse born of envy and betrayal. By dawn the castle was restless. Servants whispered of a storm coming, though the sky was clear. Darius felt it too, a pulse of dark magic crawling beneath the walls. He stood before the council table, waiting. The nobles filed in, their faces masks of courtesy. Virel entered last, veiled and graceful. My lord, she said sweetly, forgive our boldness. We come to beg you, end this folly before it ends us all. The humans already gossip that their king loves one of their kind. The word loves hit like a blade. Darius's voice was calm. You mistake compassion for love. Virel smiled. Then prove it. Show us she means nothing. The doors opened. Guards marched Ilara in. She looked small between them, her hands bound. What is this? Darius demanded. Justice, Virel replied. She spreads her poison through the lower city, humans whisper she tamed the monster king. They rally around her name. If we do nothing, rebellion will rise. It's a lie. Ilara cried. I never. Silence, a noble hissed. Virel turned to Darius. Choose, Majesty. Your kingdom or your mortal pet. The hall went still. Darius's eyes swept over his court creatures who had followed him through centuries of war, who now looked at him with doubt. He rose slowly. Power gathered around him, stirring the torches. I remember, he said, voice deep, carrying through the chamber, when mercy was not a curse word. I remember when strength meant more than cruelty. He descended the steps toward Ilara. The guards hesitated. He stopped before her and spoke softly enough for only she to hear. Do you trust me? She nodded, trembling. He turned back to the court. You call me monster for sparing one life. Then hear me well. He tore the seal ring from his finger and let it fall to the floor. The sound rang like thunder. A king protects what is his. The energy that burst from him shattered the glass windows. Wind roared through the hall, snuffing candles, scattering banners. The nobles fell back, shielding their faces. Virel screamed, he betrays the throne. He chooses a mortal over us all. Enough, Darius thundered. If my heart's awakening is treason, then I am guilty. Lightning cracked across the ceiling though no storm raged outside. The walls groaned, the very castle seemed to breathe. The ancient wards that bound him to centuries of obedience snapped like threads. Virel's eyes glowed with hatred. Then perish with your weakness. She raised her hands and spoke the words of the blood oath. Darkness poured from her like smoke, twisting into a beast of shadow. It lunged. Darius shoved Ilara behind him, summoning power that had slept for ages. His blood ignited, red light flooding the hall. The shadow beast struck his barrier and shrieked. The nobles scattered in terror. Virel's laughter echoed. You cannot save her forever. Every heartbeat you share brings you closer to ruin. Then let ruin come, Darius said. He thrust his hand forward. Light exploded outward, colliding with the curse. The force shattered pillars, tore banners from walls, and hurled Virel through the air. When the storm faded, she was gone, vanished into smoke. Ilara lay dazed against the floor. Darius knelt beside her, brushing dust from her hair. Are you hurt? She looked at the ruin around them, disbelief in her eyes. What have you done? What I should have done long ago, he said. Ended their chains. The hall was half destroyed, moonlight pouring through the broken roof. Outside, alarms rang, the city had seen the light. Ilara clutched his sleeve. They'll come for you. They already have, he answered quietly. But I will not hide. She looked at him, at the blood on his hands, the sorrow in his eyes, and whispered, You can't fight them all. He smiled faintly. Watch me. The castle burned through the night. Nobles fled, soldiers fought among themselves, and the people of Varin saw something they had never seen before, the immortal king walking through fire, a human girl beside him. Virel's curse, half broken, turned the skies crimson. The air trembled with the power of the bond between them. Wherever they stepped, flames bent away, refusing to touch them. They reached the gates. The guards, once loyal, stood trembling. None dared attack. Darius looked down at Ilara. Beyond these walls lies chaos. Are you ready? She met his gaze. If I run, I'll lose more than my life. I'll lose the reason you changed. He nodded once. Then stay close. He pushed the gates open. The first rays of dawn spilled over the city, bright and blinding. Vampires screamed from the rooftops, shielding themselves. Yet when the light touched Darius, it did not burn. The silver mark on Ilara's wrist glowed fiercely, and a shimmer surrounded them both. For the first time in centuries, the vampire king stood in sunlight and lived. The people of Varin fell silent. The legend of monsters and gods cracked before their eyes. Darius took Ilara's hand. Let the court call it treason. Let history call it madness. But today, I call it freedom. And together they walked into the light, leaving the crumbling throne behind. Smoke rolled through the streets of Varin like a living fog. The air tasted of ash and old blood. The night Darius broke the blood oath, the kingdom had shattered with it. Now, fires burned across the lower city. The vampire nobles had fled to their estates and were gathering armies under Lady Virel's banner. Rumor spread faster than flame. The immortal king has turned human. The king walks beneath the sun. For many, it was an omen of weakness. For others, a promise of hope. Darius and Ilara reached the edge of the forest before dawn. Behind them, the citadel's spires were cracked and burning, black against the brightening sky. They stopped at the riverbank, breathless. Ilara's hands were scratched and bloody from running. Darius looked almost unearthly in the half-light, his dark coat torn, his silver crown abandoned somewhere behind. We can't keep going like this, Ilara said, voice hoarse. You need to rest. He stared at the sunrise. For 6 centuries, I dreamed of this light. Now I see it, and all it shows me is ruin. She stepped beside him. Ruins can be rebuilt. He gave a hollow laugh. Not when the builders are dead. Ilara wanted to comfort him, but words felt small against the weight of his grief. Instead, she crouched to wash her hands in the river. The water reflected her face and his, standing behind her. Their eyes met in the reflection. For a moment, everything was still. Then the bond flared. A spark ran up her arm, warmth flooded her chest. Darius, she whispered, It's happening again. He reached out, hesitant, fingers brushing her wrist. Silver light rippled across both their skins, then faded. The bond protects us, he said. But it's also binding us tighter. If we're apart too long, it will drag us together again. Then we stay together, she said simply. He looked at her, this fragile, stubborn girl who refused to bend even before kings, and something inside him eased. You should hate me for dragging you into this war. Maybe, she said, but I'd rather stand in a storm with you than hide in someone else's peace. For the first time since the palace fell, he smiled. By midday they found shelter in an old watchtower buried deep in the woods. Ilara tended to his wounds as best she could. Every time her fingers brushed his skin, a faint light passed between them, sealing the cuts faster than any medicine. She frowned. You heal too quickly. And you not at all, he replied. That light, it's draining you. I'm fine. He caught her wrist gently. You're pale. Don't lie to me. She met his gaze. If the bond keeps you alive, I can bear a little weakness. Something tightened in his throat. He wanted to tell her she didn't owe him anything. But the words refused to come. Instead he said, rest. I'll keep watch. Ilara lay down on the rough blankets, exhaustion finally pulling her under. Darius sat by the narrow window, watching the forest. He could hear the approach of soldiers far away, marching feet, the faint beat of war drums. Virel's army was coming. He touched the mark on his chest, feeling it pulse in rhythm with Ilara's heart. If she dies because of me. He couldn't finish the thought. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the world in red. The fall of night had begun. At the same hour, miles away, Lady Virel stood atop the half-ruined citadel balcony. Her once perfect face was marred by burns where Darius's light had struck her, but hatred burned brighter than pain. The king bleeds, she told her followers. The sun touches him and he lives. He has broken the covenant that made us strong. He must be erased. The gathered vampires, lords, soldiers, and mercenaries bowed their heads. Virel raised her sword. At dusk tomorrow, we march. By dawn, his heart will beat no more. The crowd roared their oath, and the sky darkened as if the world itself obeyed her. Ilara woke at midnight to the sound of thunder. Darius stood in the doorway, watching the distant flashes. They're coming, he said. Too many to fight alone. Then we don't fight alone, she answered. The people, they saw you walk in daylight. Some believe in you now. Belief won't stop blades. Maybe not, she said, but hope can start something bigger. He turned toward her, eyes soft. You keep giving hope to a world that feeds on despair. Then maybe it's time the world learned to eat something new. He couldn't help a quiet laugh. You are impossible. Good, she said, picking up her pack. So let's do the impossible again. They left the tower and vanished into the storm, heading toward the city that awaited them with fire and fury. The streets of Varin were chaos by the time they returned. Human rebels had risen, emboldened by the rumors that the sun-walking king fought for them. Vampires loyal to Virel patrolled the rooftops, hunting anyone who dared speak his name. Darius and Ilara moved through the alleys disguised in common clothes. But even covered in soot and rain, he was impossible to mistake. His presence felt like gravity. At the old square, a group of humans huddled behind overturned carts, cornered by vampire soldiers. A young woman screamed as one of them raised his blade. Ilara ran forward before Darius could stop her. She grabbed a fallen plank and swung. The blow barely slowed the vampire, but it distracted him long enough for Darius to step in. He caught the soldier's wrist. Enough. Recognition flashed in the vampire's eyes. My king. Not your king, Darius said, and with a flick of his hand, threw him backward through the air. The rebels stared in awe. One whispered, his real. Another shouted, the Sun Walker. Darius turned to them. Leave this place. Take your families to the forest. The city will fall before it's freed. A gray-haired man stepped forward. If you fight, we'll fight with you. He shook his head. You cannot fight darkness with your blood alone. Ilara touched his arm. Then let them fight with their hearts. That's how everything starts. Darius looked at her and then at the people, and the smallest spark of something new flickered in his eyes, belief. "Very well," he said. "If dawn is to rise, it will rise here." By midnight, the battle reached the palace gates. Virel's army swept through the city like a tide of shadows. The rebels fought with whatever they could find, fire, silver, wooden stakes, but they were outmatched. Darius met the enemy head-on. Every swing of his blade sent bursts of red light across the square. The ground trembled beneath the clash of power. Ilara stayed close, guiding civilians to safety. Each time Darius took a blow, she felt it, a jolt of pain through the bond. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself on. At the center of the square, Virel appeared in a storm of black mist. Her eyes burned crimson. "So this is your grand rebellion. You traded immortality for pity." "I traded emptiness for life," Darius said. She raised her hand. Shadows coiled around her fingers. "Then die living." The blast hit like thunder. Darius was thrown backward, crashing through a fountain. Ilara screamed and ran to him, kneeling in the water. He was barely conscious, his chest still. "Darius, breathe." Virel approached slowly, savoring each step. "The bond ends when one heart stops. Let's see if the other survives." Ilara looked up, eyes blazing. "You'll have to go through me first." Virel laughed. "Gladly." She struck, but before the blow landed, Ilara grabbed Darius's hand. The mark on her wrist ignited, flooding the square with silver light. The glow poured into his body, forcing his heart to beat again. Darius gasped, eyes snapping open. The power that surged from him was brighter than sunlight. Virel screamed, shielding her face. "No, impossible." Darius rose slowly, the light surrounding him spreading outward. The darkness dissolved under it. "You wanted to see me burn," he said. "Then watch." He stepped forward into the dawn that broke through the clouds. The light struck his skin and did nothing. Gasps spread through both armies. The impossible was happening again. Ilara stood beside him, trembling but unafraid. The mark on her wrist shone like a second sun. Virel shrieked and lunged. Darius caught her blade barehanded. "This ends now." With a single motion, he drove his sword through the curse that bound her soul. Black fire burst outward, then vanished. When the light faded, Virel was gone, only ash scattered on the wind. The battlefield fell silent. The rebels stared as the first true sunlight touched the stones of the square. Ilara looked at Darius, tears running down her cheeks. "You did it. You broke the curse." He shook his head. "We did. Your heart carried me through the fire." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe the stories will finally end with light instead of blood." But even as she said it, she swayed. The bond that had poured strength into him now pulled it from her. He caught her before she fell. "Stay with me," he said urgently. Her voice was soft. "I'm just tired. The light, it's heavy." He held her close. "Rest. I'll carry it for both of us." Hours later, when the fires of war died, the people gathered in the same square. Darius stood among them, Ilara leaning weakly against his shoulder. The sun rose higher, warm and golden, lighting faces that had not seen hope in generations. The old banners of blood were torn down. New ones were raised, white cloth stitched with silver threads, the mark of the resonance. Darius looked to the sky. "The sun didn't burn," he said quietly. Ilara smiled. "Maybe it was never the sun that killed you. Maybe it was the darkness inside you." He turned to her. "And you chased it away." She touched his cheek. "Not chased. Shared. That's what light does." He closed his hand over hers, feeling her pulse faint and steady. "Then let this be the last night that ever falls on this kingdom." As dawn spread across the land, the last shadows of the old world vanished. The people would remember that day as the sun that didn't burn, the moment a king and a girl turned legend into life. The war did not end with Lady Virel's death. When her ashes scattered over the square, her surviving lieutenants fled into the hills carrying the taste of vengeance with them. For every noble who knelt to the new dawn, 3 others whispered that the king had gone mad. In the first fragile days of peace, Darius ruled from the ruined citadel. The once black spires were cracked and open to sunlight. Smoke still drifted through broken windows, Wild vines had already begun to crawl across the stones as if nature herself was testing this new world. The court of darkness was gone. In its place sat carpenters, healers, and human delegates. Ilara walked through the hall each morning helping the wounded. Her step was slower now. The light that had saved Darius left her pale, as though some of her life was poured into him and never returned. Yet her smile, small, stubborn, never dimmed. One afternoon, as she carried water to the training yard, she found Darius sparring with two of his guards. The sun struck him full on the shoulders, and though sweat gleamed on his skin, it did not burn. When he saw her, he lowered his sword and grinned in a way that still surprised everyone who remembered the old king. "You shouldn't be up," he said. "And you shouldn't fight while half the kingdom plots your downfall," she replied. He shrugged. "Let them plot. I've lived long enough with fear." She handed him the jug. "You've also lived long enough to know fear keeps people alive." "Perhaps," he said, drinking, "but so does hope. And for the first time, hope feels heavier." Before she could answer, a soldier hurried across the yard, mud on his boots. "Majesty," he gasped, "messenger from the southern marches, rebels rallying under a new banner. They call themselves the True Court." Darius's jaw tightened. "Virel's disciples." "Yes, my king. They claim to fight for the purity of the blood." Ilara whispered, "They'll come here." He looked at her wrist, the silver mark faint but still glowing. "Then we meet them before they reach us." That night, he gathered what remained of his loyal guard. "No more hiding behind stone walls," he told them. "If we are to live among mortals, we defend them as our own." A captain asked quietly, "And the girl, sire?" "She stays," Darius said. "She carries the light that shields us." Ilara frowned. "I can fight." "You already did," he said gently. "This time, you heal. That's your battle." She wanted to argue, but the weariness in her body betrayed her. The bond between them hummed like a tired heart. When he turned to leave, she caught his hand. "Promise me you'll come back." He looked down at their joined fingers. "You still don't understand, Ilara. Wherever I go, part of you goes with me. I couldn't leave you even if I tried." The campaign lasted a month. The True Court moved like wolves through the countryside, burning farms that pledged to the new rule. Darius's army, smaller but steadier, met them village by village. He fought not as a distant ruler but beside his men, sunlight glinting from his blade. When the last fortress fell, the rebels fled into the night. Victory came at a cost, too many dead, too much blood on both sides. Darius returned to the citadel at dawn. Ilara was waiting at the gate, leaning on a staff. Her face lit when she saw him alive. "You kept your promise," she said. "I told you," he smiled, "you never really let me go." He touched her cheek. Her skin felt cooler than before. "You're fading," he murmured. "It's only tiredness." "No," he said, "it's the bond. Each time I draw breath, I steal a little more from you." She placed her hand over his heart. "Then make every breath worth it." He held her there for a long time, listening to the twin rhythms inside them, one stronger, one fragile, but both still beating. A council met that evening. Humans sat beside vampires for the first time in history. Darius stood at the head of the table. "This kingdom will not be built on fear again," he said. "The blood tax is abolished. The feeding laws are rewritten. Those who refuse will be exiled." A murmur of disbelief rose, but no one dared interrupt. Ilara watched him from the side, pride warming through her fatigue. When he looked toward her, he saw her sway and catch herself on the table's edge. "Enough meetings," he said abruptly. "The council adjourns." He carried her from the room before anyone could speak. Later, in the quiet of the royal garden, she sat beside him on the steps. Fireflies drifted between the roses. "You can't protect me from this, Darius," she said softly. "The bond gives and takes in equal measure. Maybe this is how it was meant to end." He shook his head. "No. It was meant to begin something." She smiled faintly. "Then begin it soon." The world did not give them peace for long. When summer came, so did the last of the rebellion, an army larger than any before, forged from the scattered remnants of the old court. They came not to conquer but to destroy. On the eve of battle, the citadel was quiet. Torches lined the walls, soldiers sharpened blades in silence. Darius walked among them, giving small words of courage. When he reached his chambers, he found Ilara waiting. She wore simple armor over her gown, a dagger at her waist. "You said I should heal," she began, "but tonight I fight beside you." He opened his mouth to argue and then saw the determination in her eyes, the same light that had once stopped the rain. He nodded. "Then we fight together." Dawn broke red. The enemy poured over the hills, a dark tide under a crimson sky. Horns sounded. The last war began. Darius led the charge. Every strike of his sword shone with that strange sunlight that no darkness could swallow. Around him, his soldiers fought harder, hearts lifted by the sight of their unburning king. Ilara stayed near the wounded line, moving between soldiers, pressing her glowing hands to their wounds. Each act of healing drained her a little more. She could feel Darius's pain across the field, every cut echoing in her bones. When a blade pierced his side, she gasped and fell to her knees miles away. Blood bloomed through her tunic where his wound should have been. "Darius," she whispered. He felt her weakening and turned. Across the chaos of war, his eyes found her. The bond flared like lightning between them. He broke through the enemy lines, reaching her as she collapsed. He caught her in his arms. "Stay with me," he said. "Don't you dare leave now." Her voice trembled. "You still owe me that sunrise you promised." "You'll see it," he swore. "We both will." But even as he spoke, the enemy closed in. Arrows darkened the sky. Darius shielded her with his body, his power forming a dome of light around them. Every arrow that struck dissolved to dust, yet the effort drained him. When the smoke cleared, they were surrounded by the enemy commander and his guard. The commander sneered. "The Sunwalker bleeds like any man." Darius stood, still holding Ilara. "Perhaps. But I bleed for something greater than fear." He set her gently on the ground, then turned to face the oncoming storm. The light that rose from him this time was not sunlight but something older, something born of two hearts beating as one. The ground split, the sky blazed white. The enemy fell, blinded by it. When the brilliance faded, silence followed. The rebel army lay scattered, their weapons melted. The war was over. Darius staggered, dropping to one knee beside Ilara. She was barely breathing. "You did it," she whispered. "It's finished. At too high a cost." She smiled weakly. "There's one thing left you haven't learned." He brushed the hair from her face. "What's that?" "How to say goodbye." He shook his head fiercely. "No. You're not leaving me. I won't allow it." She reached for his hand, pressing it to her heart. "You can't command the light, Darius. You can only let it shine." Her heartbeat slowed. The silver mark on her wrist glowed once, brighter than ever, then began to fade. "No," he said again, pulling her close. "Take mine instead." He pressed his wrist to hers, and the mark reignited, blazing between them. Pain tore through him, but he didn't stop. Their breaths mingled. The bond pulsed, fusing their life forces until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. The power erupted outward, sweeping across the battlefield in a wave of golden light that turned night to dawn. When the light receded, the war was done. The field was quiet except for the whisper of the wind. The soldiers, human and vampire alike, fell to their knees, seeing the sun rise over the horizon. At its center stood Darius, holding Ilara in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open. The color had returned to her cheeks. "What happened?" she asked. "You saved us all," he said softly. "No," she breathed. "We saved each other." He smiled, tears catching in the sunlight. Around them, the surviving soldiers began to chant, not in fear, but in reverence. The legend of the dead king's heartbeat had become truth before their eyes. By evening the wounded were tended, and the bodies buried. Darius walked alone to the highest hill overlooking the valley. Ilara joined him, her steps unsteady but sure. Below them the land glowed gold under the setting sun. "Look," she said. "The light reaches everywhere now." He took her hand. "Because of you." She leaned against him. "Because of us." They stood there until the stars appeared, no longer a sky of endless night, but one threaded with the promise of morning. Darius listened to the steady rhythm in his chest. 2 heartbeats, 1 life. The kingdom would rebuild, slowly. The world would tell their story in 100 different ways. But to him, it would always be simpler than legend. He bent his head toward her ear and whispered, "You were right, Ilara. Light doesn't chase away darkness, it teaches it how to see." She smiled. "Then keep teaching." The last of the fires burned out. On the horizon, a new dawn rose, clear, soft, and endless. Somewhere beneath that light, the king's heartbeat echoed through the valley, steady and alive, carrying both their souls forward into the world they had remade. The war ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than any battle cry. Varin lay in ruins, towers half collapsed, bridges charred, and streets lined with broken banners. The old world had burned to its bones, and the survivors, human and vampire alike, stood blinking in the sunlight that refused to leave. For the first time in 6 centuries, the day did not end in dusk. The sun hung in the sky, pale and unwavering, as though afraid that night might rise again. Darius stood atop the citadel's balcony, overlooking the wounded city. The light struck him full in the face, and though his skin tingled, it did not burn. Below, people gathered, farmers, soldiers, orphans, the remnants of 2 races that had long called each other enemy. They waited for him to speak. Beside him stood Ilara, a cloak of silver-threaded linen around her shoulders. She looked thinner, paler than before, but her eyes carried the calm of someone who had already seen death and returned. The silver mark still shimmered faintly on her wrist, pulsing in time with the quiet rhythm of Darius's heart. He looked down at her. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Ilara smiled faintly. "You mean, am I ready to stand beside a king and tell the world what comes next?" He nodded. "I think," she said, glancing toward the people, "the world doesn't need another king. It needs a promise." Darius turned back to the crowd. "Then we give them one." When he stepped to the edge of the balcony, the noise below faded to silence. Every eye turned upward. Darius spoke, his voice carrying across the square with a power that made even the wind pause. "For centuries," he began, "we built our lives on fear. Vampires ruled through blood, and humans bowed because they believed the sun belonged to one race and the night to another." He paused, gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Yesterday, the night fell for the last time. We have seen what darkness can do when it hides behind pride. But we have also seen what light can do when it chooses mercy." He turned slightly toward Ilara, then back to the people. "This woman stood before monsters and did not flinch. Her courage reminded me that power means nothing without compassion. And so, today, I end the age of blood. No more feeding on the unwilling. No more tribute of life for life. From this day forward, vampires and humans shall stand under one sun, protected by the same law, judged by the same truth." Murmurs swept through the crowd, disbelief, fear, hope. A few fell to their knees, others wept. For the first time, the 2 species were not divided by daylight or shadow but united by silence. Ilara stepped forward and raised her voice. "I have no crown, no title, and no power but the one we all share, the choice to be kind. If you want a world worth living in, it starts here." She placed her hand over her heart. "Not in thrones or bloodlines, but here." A cheer rose slowly, spreading through the square like a flame catching dry grass. Someone began chanting their names. Darius, Ilara, the Dawn King and the Sun Bless. That night, Darius and Ilara met with the newly formed council, a group of human leaders, vampire elders, and scholars from both worlds. They gathered around a simple oak table, not the gilded throne that had once symbolized Darius's rule. Ilara sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the table's surface, tracing the grain of the wood as if memorizing something fragile. "The laws must be rewritten," said one of the elders. "There will be resistance. Some will never accept this union. Then we build anyway," Darius said. "If we wait for acceptance, we'll wait forever." Ilara leaned forward. "Start with what people can agree on: safety, food, medicine. If humans and vampires work side by side, trust will follow." Another counselor asked, "And the soldiers who refuse the new order?" Darius's expression darkened. We give them a choice. Serve the light or return to the dark. But if they choose the dark, they will find no refuge in this world. The council fell quiet. For the first time in memory, a vampire king had spoken not of domination, but of balance. After the meeting, Elara and Darius walked through the garden that had grown wild among the ruins. The night air smelled of jasmine and ash. The moon glowed faintly, but its light seemed softer now, less threatening. They called us foolish, Elara said with a small smile. For thinking love could change the world. They were right, Darius said. It wasn't love alone. It was your stubbornness. She laughed, the sound light and tired. My stubbornness is all I ever had. They stopped beside the fountain where, months ago, she had washed her hands after stealing bread. Now water flowed clear again. Darius looked at her reflection beside his and said quietly, when they write the history of this day, they'll call it the Dawn Accord. But what I'll remember is that it began with a thief's hug. Elara tilted her head, teasing. Then maybe you should steal something next time. Just to keep it even. He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've already stolen everything. Her laughter faded into a soft sigh. The world's changing, Darius. But we can't change time. He didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand, feeling the faint, weakening pulse beneath her skin. The bond that had tied their hearts was still alive, but fading. And he knew that as her life thinned, so did the light that kept his own burning. Days turned into weeks. The sun never again vanished completely behind clouds. Crops grew faster, rivers ran clearer, and for the first time in centuries, children played in the streets without fear of nightfall. Yet amid this renewal, a shadow lingered in the halls of the citadel, the shadow of mortality. Elara tired easily now. Sometimes she would pause mid-sentence, catching her breath as if the air itself weighed too much. Darius watched her from the doorway one evening as she struggled to lift a basket of scrolls. He crossed the room silently, taking it from her hands. You're not indestructible, you know, he said. Neither are you, she countered, smiling up at him. Yet here we are, both still standing. For how long? He asked softly. Elara reached up, touched the side of his face. Long enough to finish what we started. The next morning, as dawn painted the city gold, bells rang across Varin. The first joint council was signed into law. Vampires and humans stood side by side beneath the sun, stamping their marks on parchment. The world was new. Elara sat quietly beside Darius, watching the signatures dry. When the final mark was made, she whispered, "It's done." Darius turned to her, his smile soft. "No, Elara. It's just beginning." And though his words were strong, his heart trembled with a fear he would never admit aloud that beginnings, like light, always came at the cost of something ending. Years passed. Varin became known as the City of Two Dawns, one born from the sun, the other from the hearts that refused to die in darkness. Humans and vampires lived together, not in perfect harmony, but in fragile peace. The wounds of history faded into stories told to children at twilight. At the heart of it all stood the rebuilt citadel, its walls gleaming white where black stone once ruled. And within those walls, Elara's laughter still echoed, though softer now, aged by time. She grew older, her hair silvering, her steps slower. The mark on her wrist had dimmed almost to nothing, a whisper of light that pulsed only when Darius was near. He had not changed. To mortals he seemed eternal, but behind his calm gaze lingered sorrow, the pain of watching her slip gradually into a world he could never follow. One morning, she sat in the garden beneath the blooming cherry trees. Darius joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He set them down and sat beside her in the sunlight. Still afraid of burning? She asked with a teasing smile. Still amazed that I don't, he replied. She sipped her tea slowly, hands trembling slightly. I used to think immortality was a curse. Now I think it's lonelier than I imagined. It is, he admitted. Until you find something worth dying for. And what did you find? She asked, though she already knew the answer. He looked at her, eyes gentle. You. She smiled faintly. Then maybe you've already lived enough. That evening, as the sun lowered, the sky turned to fire, orange and crimson streaks melting into gold. Ilara lay in bed, her breathing shallow but peaceful. Darius sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. "You've given them everything," he whispered. "They'll remember you long after we're gone." "I don't need to be remembered," she murmured. "I just need you to keep living." "Without you?" he asked. "With me," she said softly, tapping his chest. "Here." The silver mark flared one last time on her wrist, then slowly faded, its light sinking into his skin like dawn disappearing into day. Her eyes closed. Her lips parted for a final breath that came out as a sigh of peace. The world seemed to hold still. The wind stopped, the garden stilled, the sun paused halfway to the horizon. Darius pressed her hand to his heart. For a moment, he feared silence. Then he felt it, the faintest echo, her heartbeat inside his own, steady and alive. He lifted her gently, carried her through the halls of the citadel, and stepped out onto the balcony where they had once proclaimed the dawn accord. The sun was rising again, fierce and golden. He whispered to her still form, "You kept your promise." The light never left. As he spoke, the first beam of sunlight touched them both. The warmth should have burned him, but it didn't. Instead, it wrapped around him like her embrace. The mark on his chest glowed briefly, then settled into a steady rhythm. A single tear fell from his eyes, glinting like liquid crystal as it hit the stone. When it touched the ground, flowers bloomed, silver-petaled blossoms that turned toward the sun. The people of Varin would later tell stories. That on the morning the Queen of Light died, the sun refused to set for 7 days. That its endless glow warmed crops, healed the sick, and silenced war. And that when the light finally dimmed, it did not fade into night, but into a gentle golden haze that never left the horizon. Darius became known as the Eternal King. He ruled quietly, fairly, never again raising a sword. Every dawn, he would stand on the same balcony, eyes closed, feeling the pulse within his chest, a rhythm that no longer belonged to him alone. Decades later, travelers spoke of an unending mourning over the kingdom of Varin. When asked why the sun never truly set there, the elders would smile and answer, "Because once, a thief hugged a monster and taught him that even darkness deserves a heart." And far above, on the wind that brushed through the silver blossoms, one could almost hear her voice, soft, laughing, full of warmth. Love didn't conquer the dark. It simply reminded it how to see. If that story touched your heart, don't let it fade into the dark. Hit subscribe and ring that bell, because more tales like this are waiting to awaken your imagination. Every week, we dive into worlds where love defies death, monsters learn to feel, and light refuses to die. So, if you believe stories still have the power to make hearts beat again, then join me. The next dawn begins with you.